Chapter 21. Jack deals with some consequences. Jack woke with a knife buried into his head. He was pretty sure it was a real, physical knife too, until he opened his eyes and realized he was still alive. A moan escaped him, finding its way through the wasteland that was his throat. He brought his hands to his face, blocking out the daylight, and wondered what the hell he'd done that made him deserving of this punishment. His whole body ached, and he began turning around in an attempt to relieve himself from a bit of the pain, but only succeeded in making more pain shoot up his injured shoulder. A frankly embarrassing whimper escaped him. At the very least, nobody was there to hear him. "Need a bucket?" Jack lifted his arm to see. Hiccup stood leaned against the wall, squinting back at him. His hair was a crow's nest, and the bags under his eyes seemed somehow darker than they had the morning after the battle. He was holding a bucket. What? Jack muttered, looking around the room. That was a mistake. When he turned, it set the rest of the world into motion as well, and nausea welled up in him. He pressed a hand over his mouth, and Hiccup quickly came to the rescue, holding the bucket for him. When Jack's stomach was emptied, he whimpered again. He swore he'd never felt this miserable in his entire life. "I'll get you something to drink," Hiccup told him, and disappeared with the bucket. Jack supposed he should feel bad for making him do that, but he couldn't focus on anything but the pounding in his head. His body slumped against the wall. It was with immense difficulty, but Jack's brain slowly started working through the events of last night. He'd been in the Great Hall. The meat had been awful at first, but then less so after a little while. The memories were hazy, but he knew he'd been acting like a fool. That didn't matter, though. Despite the haziness, he remembered very clearly how much fun he'd been having. Hiccup came back up the stairs and put the now empty and clean bucket by the bed, then handed Jack a tankard of water. The tankard looked a little too much like the ones they'd been drinking off last night, and his stomach made a disgruntled sound. "I guess asking how you feel would be a dumb question," Hiccup said, sitting down beside him. His voice was scratchy, and he spoke quietly. Jack got the feeling he was suffering from the same type of headache. "Is it always like this?" Jack whispered back, smiling dryly. "Because not sure if it's worth it." Hiccup chuckled, then groaned softly. "Never feels worth it the morning after," he agreed. They fell into a silence that wasn't entirely comfortable, but none of them had the energy to care much about it. Jack took a sip of the water and used it to wash out the taste in his mouth before spitting it out into the bucket. "What time is it?" he asked. Hiccup hummed, squinting out the window. "Pretty early, still," he said. "You can sleep some more if you want to." The thought was tempting, but Jack doubted he'd be able to sleep while his body still felt like this. "Where are the others?" "At home, probably. Astrid and Fishlakes might have gone back to the Great Hall after we left, so maybe they passed out there. Hopefully she made sure the twins didn't bully Stuntlow too much. He's always emotional when he's hungover, and I just..." Hiccup closed his eyes and rubbed his temple. "Don't have the empathy for that right now." That made Jack laugh, before he also groaned. "What do you usually do then? I feel like I'm dying." "You just suffer through it," Hiccup said, and smiled sympathetically at him. His hair was auburn in the morning light. His exhaustion had robbed his face of most of its color, though it made his freckles stand out even more, as well as the dark circles. Jack's thoughts came to a sudden halt. "Hold on," he said, his brows knitting tightly together. What, how am I here?" Hiccup blinked. "What do you mean?" It was a slow process, but Jack managed to kick his mind back into motion again, continuing where it had left off. They'd gone into the woods. Hiccup had shown him the place where he met Toothless for the first time. Jack was pretty sure there'd been a campfire, and then... He stared at Hiccup, trying to trigger his memory. His mind was completely blank. "Jack," Hiccup said slowly, "I walked you here, remember? Like I said, we left Astrid and the others." He trailed off when Jack didn't give any indication that he recalled any of that. His shoulders sank. How much do you remember?" "There was the campfire," Jack said uncertainly. "Right?" "There was a campfire," Hiccup agreed, "and the others were daring each other to jump into the pond. Don't you remember that?" A shiver went down Jack's spine. He could vaguely remember a pond. "Did I?" He started and gave a relieved sigh when Hiccup shook his head. At the very least he was predictable, even when he was drunk. He'd never jump into any body of water willingly, except for a bath, of course. "Is this normal?" he asked. Hiccup pursed his lips, looking down at his hands. He shrugged. "You did drink a bit much, and it was your first time," he mused. He sounded somewhat disappointed, so Jack supposed they'd probably done something fun last night, and now Jack couldn't even remember it. "Blacking out happens. We've all been there. Snot blacks out every time." Jack studied him silently for a few seconds. "Did something happen?" he asked. A dreadful feeling was starting to set in. Maybe Jack hadn't done something fun. Maybe he'd done something awful. Maybe he'd said something he shouldn't. His stomach lurched violently, and he steeled himself not to puke again. It took too long before Hiccup answered. He opened his mouth, hesitated, glanced at Jack, then shook his head. "I mean, obviously, things happen, but it's nothing you have to worry about," he said, and tried for a smile. "Are you sure?" Jack asked slowly. "Because the way you said it kind of makes it sound like I should." "What other way should I say it, then?" Hiccup asked. Jack averted his eyes. "Good question. I don't know," he mumbled. He wrung his hands. "Hiccup, you didn't reveal anything, if that's what you're thinking about," Hiccup interrupted, making Jack look up at him again, but the former was looking tiredly at the floor. "Nothing that made sense, anyway. You were pretty drunk. Something about believing that you could fly, so that's why I jumped off that cliff." Jack closed his eyes. "Anything more?" he asked in a small voice. Hiccup hummed thoughtfully. "Not much. You were going on a lot about how happy you were," he said, and chuckled softly. "Happy about being alive and having friends and all, so that was nice." The knot in Jack's stomach slowly started to loosen up. Maybe his drunken self was more responsible than he'd given him credit for. Who would have thought? "And you said something about, Jack Frost?" "Never mind." Jack reached for the bucket. "Yeah, it's better to just get it out," Hiccup said, patting Jack's back. "You'll feel better after." Jack's head lolled forward, his forehead hitting the edge of the bucket. His heart hammered. "Jack Frost," he repeated. Nobody had called him that for weeks, with an exception for the Snow Queen, and the name seemed almost unfamiliar in his mouth. "Jack Frost," Hiccup said again, attempting to fix his pronunciation. Jack would have found it charming if his mind wasn't reeling. "You said your friends call you that, so I asked if you wanted me to call you that, but then you said, I don't know. You said you weren't sure if you were him anymore, or something." "And that was it?" "Pretty much, yeah." Hiccup was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" Jack didn't really know what to answer. He slowly raised his head and put the bucket down on the floor. "Yeah," he breathed. "It's just been a while. I didn't expect to hear it. Also, I feel absolutely wrecked." Hiccup huffed softly. "Maybe some food will help," he offered, then laughed again when Jack grimaced. "At least some fresh air, then. We can take a walk around the village before people start waking up." Jack wasn't sure if his legs would be able to carry his weight, but he nodded. He let Hiccup help him up, feeling just as old as his age for once, and then winced when he reached down to pick up his staff. His left hand hovered helplessly over his injured shoulder, and Hiccup cursed. "Forgot about that," he said. "Can I take a look? You might have reopened the wound at some point last night." Jack held back a moan. He slipped the cloak off his shoulders and let Hiccup do the rest. "It felt fine yesterday," he grumbled. "That's meat for you," Hiccup said, sending him a lopsided smile. Jack couldn't help but smile back, but it turned into a confused frown when Hiccup seemed to avert his eyes. Maybe he'd imagined it. "I think it's all right," he mumbled, "but we should change the bandages. Maybe do that first?" Jack nodded. "I can do it myself," he said, feeling like a bother. "You don't look very sharp either today." "Thanks," Hiccup said, picking up Jack's staff for him. "It's fine, though. Besides, I don't trust your abilities to bandage yourself. Come on, let's go downstairs." They sat down by the hearth so that Jack wouldn't be cold while Hiccup cleaned the wound and changed the bandages. Jack kept one hand on the bucket, staring gloomily at a spot on the floor in an attempt to fight off the vertigo. Once that was done, they both got to their feet and headed out at a very slow, careful pace. Jack threw out the contents of the buckets, then left it by the door. deciding that whenever his body decided to eject what remained inside it, it was just something he'd have to deal with when that moment arrived. At least the sky had clouded over again. Jack wasn't sure if his eyes and pounding head would survive direct sunlight at the moment. The air was crisp and cold, and the village was mostly quiet. A few people were walking around or sat limply against the walls of their huts, indubitably in the same predicament as Jack and Hiccup. A few of them raised their hands in greeting, smiling knowingly. Jack smiled back at them. The community among people with hangovers was a quiet but intensely empathetic one, and he couldn't help but fall slightly in love with it. They passed by the ramp leading down to the docks. A ship swayed serenely in the water while a few people helped each other loading it with barrels and boxes. "Are they going somewhere?" Jack asked. Hiccup blinked, having obviously been light years away just now. He looked down at the ship.
Trading, probably. People refuse to not be stocked up on meat at any given moment,"
he explained with a strained smile, as if the mere thought of meat made his stomach lurch. It definitely did that to Jack's stomach. He was also pretty sure those people down on the docks were hungover as well, so he admired their ardor.
"When exactly did you black out?"
Hiccup was looking at the ground, only briefly glancing at Jack at the question. Jack took a deep breath to calm his nerves. He felt like there was something Hiccup wasn't telling him, though it had sounded like he was telling the truth when he said Jack hadn't revealed anything he shouldn't. Then again, Jack shouldn't have mentioned Jack Frost, and yet... "We'd gotten down to that place," Jack said, "and that's about it. Wait, Fishlegs was carrying a barrel, wasn't he? We didn't finish that, did we? No wonder I feel like death." Hiccup shook his head.
"You had a bit of it, but I'm pretty sure the others finished it after we left," he said.
"Why did we leave before the others?" Jack asked. Did the twins do anything?" He tried to make it sound like a joke, but maybe that was the loophole. Hiccup had said Jack hadn't told him anything he wasn't supposed to, but that didn't mean the twins had kept their mouths shut.
"In Snotlout's case, probably," Hiccup said. "But aside from that, they didn't do anything that they wouldn't usually do. We left because, you threw up. You were the first to throw up."
Jack frowned. "I did?"
"Yep. So I asked if you wanted to go, and you agreed because you were cold. And then we just walked home, went to bed."
Jack peered at him. "That's it?"
"Yeah, Jack,"
Hiccup said, sending him a small smile.
"Really. Drunk you isn't all that different from sober you. You've got nothing to worry about."
Jack had a whole lot to worry about, but he smiled back in a way he hoped seemed genuine. "Well, I had fun," he said. "Maybe a little too much fun, it feels like. No, actually, what am I saying? You can never have too much fun."
"I beg to differ," Hiccup said with a snort. "Thought you said it wasn't worth the hangover?"
"That's just present me problem. I, for one, is happy for past me. He had the grandest time last night." He elbowed Hiccup, and this time his smile was actually genuine. "Thank you," he told him. "I think I remember being pretty clingy. I hope you didn't mind."
"Oh, not at all,"
Hiccup said, before he seemed to choke on his own spit. He cleared his throat.
"I mean, no, it's fine. Completely normal reaction. Astrid's the same."
"Really?" Jack frowned, trying to remember. "Can't imagine that."
"Her mental line between hugging and wrestling gets blurrier with every tankard. But yeah."
Jack laughed at that, followed by another groan when his head protested. They were walking past the blacksmith towards the great hall when Jamie and Brand came running past.
"She went that way,"
Brand was yelling, before coming to a sudden halt when he spotted Jack and Hiccup. Jamie ran straight into him.
"What? Oh, Jack!"
Jamie beamed at him, and Jack yearned to have just half his energy. However, there was something a bit too knowing about his smile, which was explained just a moment later.
"Did you guys have fun last night?"
he asked in a voice that was a bit on the sing-songy side. Yeah?" Jack asked slowly. "How so?" Brand and Jamie shared a look.
"Nothing,"
Jamie then said, waving his hand. Jack wondered if that was a gesture Jamie had adopted from him.
"Just saw you wandering into the woods last night is all."
He interrupted himself with a laugh, probably because Jack couldn't for the life of him keep a poker face. "Wait, hold on," Jack said, in an attempt to redeem some of his dignity, or at least distract everyone from the lack of it. "What were you doing out that late?" Jamie's smile stiffened. He shared another look with Brand, and then they both glanced in the direction they'd been running earlier. Jack and Hiccup followed their gaze.
Is that a terrible terror?
Hiccup asked.
No,
Jamie and Brand said in chorus. Jamie grinned, grabbing Brand's arm.
Gotta go.
And they ran off. Jack looked after them, then squinted at Hiccup.
He's up to no good, he observed. Shouldn't Big Brother go after him, then?
Hiccup asked, and they started walking again. No, it's not Big Brother's job stopping him from getting into trouble. Getting him out of it, maybe, but I'm sure he'll be fine.
Terrible terrors can be pretty feisty,
Hiccup warned. The little ones? Jack asked doubtfully. Hiccup sent him a look.
I really haven't taught you enough about dragons, have I? Size has nothing to do with the sharpness of their teeth, I'll tell you that.
Jack clicked his tongue. Well, you were figuring out dragons on your own. I'm sure Jamie and Brand will as well.
I lost a leg, though.
Are you trying to make me go after him? Hiccup laughed, softening it to have mercy on his own head. His voice was hoarse. It was a nice kind of different.
No, he'll be fine, he said. I've seen that dragon around. She's friendlier than she makes it seem.
How do you differentiate it from the other terrible terrors?
Are you kidding? They look completely different.
They do not, Jake argued with an amused grin. All of Gothies look the same as well, and I lived with them for a while.
That's on you and your poor observation skills, Hiccup shot back.
That earned him a surprised laugh. I'm bad at observing? Jack asked, pushing the doors to the great hall open.
Why is that funny?
Hiccup asked. Jack just shook his head. Long story. Don't have the energy to tell it right now. He excused himself, then got distracted by the sight in front of him. The great hall looked like a disaster zone. People were draped over the tables and some on the floor. Some of them seemed to be unconscious. The smell wasn't great either. Jack contemplated turning back, but then spotted a couple of familiar blondes brooding by a table in the corner of the hall. Is that Astrid and Fishlegs?
You don't want to talk to them right now,
Hiccup told him with a dark laugh.
I've made that mistake before. Never again.
Gods, I'll take your word for it. They made their way across the room to an empty table. Jack looked at halfway unconscious villagers they passed and was quietly grateful that however drunk he'd been last night, he hadn't been that drunk. Someone had prepared soup, and for once Jack praised its lack of taste. It didn't trigger any reaction from Jack's stomach, while still making him feel a little less shaky and weak. He and Hiccup ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. Jack only wondered why Hiccup had that thoughtful frown on his face, which he had been wearing ever since their conversation in his bedroom. Eventually, Astrid and Fishlegs made their way over to them, both with heavy bags under their eyes.
Morning,
Astrid mumbled as she sat down. Her voice reminded Jack of a door in need of oiling.
Get home safe last night?
Jack shot Hiccup a look, hoping for some sign that would tell him what Hiccup wasn't.
Yep,
Hiccup replied, revealing nothing.
And you?
For once, it was Hiccup hiding things from Jack. That didn't make it any less frustrating.
Yeah, we walked the twins and Snotlout home. He slept over at their place, and then we went back here.
Fishlegs frowned.
Have you checked on Snotlout since? Maybe that wasn't such a good idea, leaving him at their mercy.
Astrid shrugged.
I have to admit, I really don't care right now.
Fishlegs grunted in agreement, and Hiccup shrugged, taking another spoonful of soup. Jack shook his head in fond amusement.
You're strangely quiet, Jack, Astrid then said.
She looked as if she was trying to sound teasing, but didn't have the energy to really make an effort. Instead, she came out sympathetic, which was probably the opposite of what she'd set out to do.
Had a good night's sleep?
A good night's sleep was probably pushing it, but Jack really had no way of knowing. I guess, he replied. Did we stay out late? Astrid frowned. You don't remember? She asked with a hoarse laugh. That was just the story of his life, wasn't it? Jack shrugged, looking at Hiccup again. Did we stay up late? He asked him. Hiccup hesitated, narrowing his eyes in thought.
Maybe. You passed out pretty suddenly. Guess we got a few hours of sleep, but probably not enough, he said. I went for a flight with Toothless first thing in the morning, and when I came back, you were awake. You went for a flight? In this state?
Fishlegs asked incredulously.
That's Hiccup for you, isn't it?
Astrid mumbled.
A slow one,
Hiccup said.
And it's not like Toothless can fly on his own.
We could have gone last night, Jack said.
Horrible idea.
Those are the best ones. Astrid squinted at him.
How much do you remember exactly?
Jack told her what he told Hiccup, and watched as some kind of realization found its way into her expression. She glanced at Hiccup, and a silent conversation passed between them. Jack resisted the urge to roll his eyes. And apparently I didn't reveal any huge secrets, Jack answered for Hiccup. Then he frowned. Wait, we talked about this yesterday, didn't we?
We did, Astrid confirmed. I was surprised you were drinking even when you knew I was trying to get you to speak, but... She hesitated, averting her eyes for a moment. I guess someone with something to hide wouldn't do that.
Or someone with a serious lack of impulse control, Jack wanted to say, but wisely kept his mouth shut. He felt himself smile, which was a little painful because of his chapped lips.
Gods, are you saying you trust me, Astrid? He asked her.
Astrid rolled her eyes, but a small smile played on her lips as well.
Maybe, she relented. I'll try to be content with the explanation that you're just a weird person.
Oh, look, Fishleg said, and Hiccup choked on his soup as he started to laugh. Snotlot and the twins had entered the great hall. The twins acted casual, a little too casual, because Snotlot had the most wonderful cold drawings on his face, ranging from runes Jack didn't understand, to fake facial hair, to crude things that needed not to be visualized. Jack was curious about dragons, but not that curious. On the other hand, Ruffnet and Tuffnet really had a hidden talent in drawing, and Jack enjoyed the fact that no matter what, certain things about humanity never changed.
Do we tell him?
Fishlegs asked, and got a unanimous no in reply from the other three. Snotlot and the twins fetched the bowls of soup and came over to their table. Jack did his best at pretending nothing was out of the ordinary, but couldn't help but snicker when Astrid greeted Snotlot good morning and punched him in the arm.
Oh, what was that for?
Snotlot snapped, before wincing again when Fishlegs did the same at his other side.
What did I do?
Just following orders, Fishlegs said, returning nonchalantly to his soup. Snotlot's eyes flickered back and forth between them.
What?
It says, hit me, Hiccup explained quietly in Jack's ear. This information made Jack very happy. Sure, he couldn't read, but he knew this joke was just as prevalent in modern times. He wondered if it was considered a classic prank here as well. Or maybe Ruffnet and Tuffnet were the first humans to ever come up with it. Surely not, but Snotlot didn't seem to understand what was going on. Jack grinned. Humans had really always been humans.
It's a beautiful day, isn't it?
Tuffnet asked, sitting down on Jack's other side.
We just took a stroll around the village, Ruffnet explained. Everyone done puking already?
Jack closed his eyes.
Don't mention that. What, puke? You don't want me to mention puke? Why shouldn't I mention...
Jack sent her a look, and she closed her mouth.
Sorry, she muttered.
That got the rest of the table's attention. Jack shifted uncomfortably under the other's surprised looks and tried to smile in a friendly, yet slightly exasperated way, like everything was normal.
But yeah, I think so, he said,
replying to her question.
How do you feel, Snotlot?
Snotlot blinked at the sudden attention, and Jack hoped it wasn't too obvious that he was trying to change the topic.
I feel fine,
he replied, almost indignantly. His face did a weird thing where it looked like he was trying to smile and scowl at the same time.
I wasn't that drunk last night.
Jack tried not to laugh. He really did. But when the others started guffawing, it was impossible not to.
At least you're not alone in blacking out this time, Astrid said,
reaching over the table to pat Jack on the shoulder.
Oh, Thor, I'm sorry,
she then hissed when Jack's wince made her realize she'd patted his injury, and with that, Ruffnet and Jack's strange interaction was forgotten. Or so Jack hoped. While their energy levels were glaringly diminished, especially in comparison to last night, the mood around the table was quick to brighten. Around them, people had begun pulling their faces off of tables and floor, and helped cleaning up the mess. At one point, Gobba appeared from behind the chief's table, looking lost and confused, but also like this was exactly what he'd expected would happen. He staggered towards the doors in a bit of a hurry, but still made time to greet them as he passed by. Jack wondered what Jamie was doing. In all honesty, he was worried about him and the terrible terror, though he tried not to think about it. It was his job to protect Jamie, but he refused to be described as overprotective. He knew Jamie could take care of himself, though he was also good at getting himself into trouble. But like Jack had told him, and it felt so long ago now, sometimes getting into trouble was okay, probably even healthy, as long as you didn't die or get seriously injured, which wasn't unlikely on this island.
But what are you thinking about?
Hiccup asked. Jack turned to him and realized he'd been frowning.
"Jamie," he admitted. "Oh, I didn't scare you that much, did I?" Jack snorted. "No, it's just, do you ever feel like, in moments like these, where everything is—"
He trailed off and looked around the table. The others were chatting, not vigorously exactly, but still with a cheerful air around them. Snotlout still hadn't noticed the violation of his face. "As it should be," Jack continued with a smile, before turning back to Hiccup. "That things are about to go really, really wrong?" Hiccup pressed his lips together.
"I tried to ignore that voice," he admitted.
Then his brows knitted together, and he lowered his voice.
"Is there anything specific on your mind, or just regular old paranoia?"
The doors opened, and Spitlout came trudging in. Jack would have commented on the greenish hue on his face, but something else caught his attention. Something that made him get to his feet and grab his staff. He walked away from the table unthinkingly, heading towards the doors.
Jack?"
Hiccup called after him, sounding very far away. Maybe Jack should have knocked on wood. He held onto the door so tightly, the floor spinning beneath him. His ears clogged and his lungs stopped responding. It was snowing. "Has she come?" A voice in his head was shrieking. "Is it too late?" He jumped when someone touched his shoulder, whirling around. Hiccup held up his hand.
"Sorry, you didn't hear me, I think,"
he said.
"What's wrong?"
Nothing. It's fine." Jack gestured at the sky with what he hoped was a convincing smile. "It's snowing. Wonderful, right? I have to find Jamie. See you, Hiccup." He rushed down the stairs before Hiccup could reply. Jamie met him halfway down to the docks in the middle of the village, and he ran into Jack's arms without saying a word.
"Is she here?"
she asked, attempting to yell and whisper at the same time. Babytooth was by his shoulder, zipping back and forth in alarm. Jack held onto Jamie as well, not bothering to hide his distress. He closed his eyes, trying to recall the feeling he'd had right before the battle. The Snow Queen's mark didn't hurt, and though Jack didn't know if it was just his own mind panicking or not, the snow felt sinister and dangerous. He shook his head. I don't think so," he managed. He looked around. The few villagers who were out went about their business, but some of them were giving Jack and Jamie strange looks. Jack gently ushered them to a less busy spot, then kneeled in front of Jamie to get on his eye level. "You remember what she said, right? That I had to come to her." Jamie's eyes widened.
"What? No,
I won't," Jack quickly interrupted, shaking his head. "I won't go, all right? We stay together, Jamie. But we can't—" The words got stuck in his throat, but Jack knew there was no other way. The new bonds he'd formed with Hiccup and all the others, and Stoic and the entire village, were just all the more reason for why they had to leave. "We can't stay here," he whispered.
"But where would we go?"
Jamie asked.
"We don't know where we are, and we'd need a boat or something, or a dragon, or
a ship," Jack said, bringing his hand to his forehead as an idea hit him. "They're loading a ship at the docks just now. Trading," Hiccup said. "They're going somewhere else to trade. We can sneak onto that ship and... Jimmy pressed his lips together, waiting doubtfully for the genius conclusion. Babytooth chirped mournfully, and Jack nodded in agreement. "At least we'll be somewhere else," he said, flipping a palm to the sky. Snowflakes landed on his hand, melting as soon as it made contact. "We'd have to leave at some point anyway. If we find other places like that one island, spots that hold magic, then maybe we can get a hold of the Guardians again. And maybe, hopefully, being on the move will make it harder for the Snow Queen to find me." Jamie was quiet.
"But what about—" he started, glancing back at the village. "What about Brand and the others? What about Hiccup? We can't just leave without telling them."
Jack's brain treacherously replayed Hiccup's promises of helping them. And then it replayed yesterday, dancing with the others, strangers and not-so-strangers, and friends. It replayed flying with Hiccup and Toothless. It replayed Hiccup's sleeping face from the several times they shared a bed, and how Jack kept realizing how wonderful it was to be alive again. He'd never had this before. Not the first time he was alive, and though the other Guardians were his friends, it was different from just being a next-to-normal teenager with next-to-normal friends. The thought of leaving all that behind almost made his determination crumble completely. Why did everything good in his life have to be taken away from him?
"Jack?"
Jack looked back at Jamie and let out a shaky breath. "We have to," he whispered. "They'll never let us leave alone, and I can't put them in any more danger. It's already bad enough that I can't protect you." Jamie's lip quivered. He threw his arms around Jack, making a sound like he was choking back a sob. "Okay," he murmured weakly, pulling back. He nodded in an imitation of resolve. "We can do it. What do we do first?" Good question. Jack didn't want to admit that he didn't have a plan. He was 300 years old, but those years hadn't prepared him for sneaking off an island on which they had magically appeared after being tossed through time, and on top of that losing his powers, and on top of that making friends who he now didn't want to let go of. "They probably have food on the ship," Jack mused. "I expect the journey will be a few days long, but we're 2 people who need food. I mean, don't look so affronted, Baby Tooth. So we should get some extra food somehow, and probably some extra clothes too. If we can sneak into the storage Astrid got her clothes from, and then—" Jamie raised his brows when he trailed off. "And then?" "Hiccup still has the crystal," Jack said. Jamie said a word his mom would not approve of, making Jack's jaw drop. You can't say that," he tried before his words drowned in surprised laughter. Jamie turned pink, struggling to hold back his own giggles. Jack cleared his throat. "Okay, thank you. Back to business." "Don't tell my mom." "I won't. All right, we have to get clothes and some food that hopefully won't go bad, and then the crystal from Hiccup before the ship leaves." Jack twisted his staff nervously. "When does the ship leave?" Jamie looked in the direction of the docks. "I can ask," he said. "I've talked to them before, so it won't be weird. You go get the crystal. Do you know where it is?" I'll know soon." Jack got to his feet. "Baby Tooth, maybe come with me, in case you can sense the crystal. Jamie, come back to Hiccup's after you've been at the dock, all right?" Jamie nodded resolutely before running off. Jack was about to do the same, but the second Jamie disappeared around the corner, his body turned awfully heavy, and he leaned on his staff to keep himself upright. Baby Tooth tweeted softly, holding out her hands in the silent question to help. Jack smiled weakly. "Never gets easier, does it?" he muttered. Baby Tooth didn't answer. Jack straightened up and headed for the Haddock house. It felt weird just walking into the house without knocking or anything, but Jack supposed he'd stayed enough nights to justify it. He glanced around, hoping he didn't look too much like a boy on the run, before entering. He closed the door behind himself and waited. Hiccup?" he called out, getting no answer. He walked through the room and peeked into Stoic's bedroom, which was empty. He was alone. "Where would you hide a magic crystal?" he pondered out loud. Baby Tooth shrugged, and Jack hummed thoughtfully. "I guess he probably isn't hiding it on purpose. He doesn't even know what it is." Baby Tooth's chirp was hushed, like a whisper. "No, he can't know. That would be absurd," Jack said, biting his lip. "Right?" She shrugged again. Nothing was impossible, but if Hiccup had known all along, he would have said something, wouldn't he? Not that Jack had been very open in return. Actually, maybe Hiccup was hiding it from him because he already knew what Jack was hiding. No, definitely not. Jack started snooping around the living room, opening chests and drawers. All he found were pieces of silver, weaponry, old drawings, and other normal things that were far from magical time crystals. He headed up to Hiccup's bedroom, glancing nervously at the window Toothless usually came through. "You don't think he lost it, right?" Jack asked after a few minutes of searching. He pulled himself up to his feet after pressing down on the floorboards, hoping to find a secret storage space under them. He didn't. I mean, if he doesn't know what it is, then maybe he just dropped it at some point. Baby Tooth didn't have an answer for him. They went back downstairs to check the floorboards there, but before they got so far, the door opened. Jack froze in place. "Jack, there! Oh, there you are." Jamie had snowflakes in his hair. He pointed urgently the way he'd come. "He said they're leaving whenever everyone's ready, which can be at any moment. We have to hurry. Did you find it?" "Oh, man." Jake rubbed his forehead and looked around the room again. "No, it's nowhere. I'm getting a feeling you might have lost it." Jamie rocked on the balls of his feet. "That would be bad," he said slowly. "Feels like it," Jake replied with an unhelpful shrug. "I'll try to stall them," Jamie said. "Just keep looking." He turned and ran, closing the door behind himself. Jack shared a concerned look with Baby Tooth. "Stall them?" he muttered. "He sounded pretty confident. I hope he knows what he's doing." Jamie didn't know what he was doing. To be honest, he was pretty terrified about what was to come, so how he was running so determinedly towards the docks right now was something he couldn't quite explain. Jack telling him they had to leave had hit him like a sledgehammer. Not that he didn't want to go home, but he guessed he'd kind of almost resigned himself to the fact that maybe there was no going home. Maybe this was it. It hadn't been conscious acceptance, but it was the only thing that could explain the sadness filling up in his chest. But he understood why they had to leave. The snow had freaked Jamie out as well, and he'd sort of guessed the news was coming before Jack had even told him. Brand and the others had been confused when Jamie suddenly bolted. It was right after Hildur had cheered, "It's snowing!" too. Well, most of them had been confused. Brand had seemed... Jamie didn't know what exactly. He'd been acting a bit odd lately, and Jamie was almost afraid to find out why. He was just about to thunder down the ramps to the docks when his path was abruptly blocked. "What are you doing?" Anders yelled in his face, making Jamie let out a surprised yelp. Anders barked a laugh. "Did your voice just crack?" "No," Jamie protested, eyes flickering nervously from Anders to Hildur and Brand as they came up to her side. "Nothing. Just gonna talk to the boat people." "Why?" Brand asked. "Jamie, you're acting weird." Jamie shifted his weight from foot to foot. "No, I'm not." "Just saying, no, I'm not. It's not gonna make you any less weird," Hildur said, crossing her arms. "Okay, well," Jamie threw out his arms. "It's really none of your business anyway, so if you can just let me past." Anders stepped in his way again. "Or not," he grumbled. "What isn't our business?" Hildur demanded. "Why did you turn all pale and scared just then?" Jamie opened his mouth to answer, but realized he didn't know what to say. He couldn't come up with a lie on the spot, and the ship could be leaving any second. He looked desperately to each of them before his eyes landed on Brand. "I don't know if you've believed anything I've told you," he said, "but it's got something to do with that, and it's crucial that it stops the ship from leaving for long enough to..." He cut himself off, glancing nervously at Anders and Hildur. "To what?" Brand whispered, eyes wide. Jamie opened and closed his mouth. "I'll tell you if you help me," he said. The trio exchanged looks. Hildur shrugged. "What do you want us to do?" she asked. Jack groaned in frustration when every inch of the floor, even in Stoic's bedroom, had been checked, and still he'd found nothing. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Maybe he's hidden it with Astrid or something. Are you sure it wasn't still in Tooth's satchel?" Babytooth nodded resolutely. Jack ran a hand over his face. "We can't leave without it. It's too dangerous," he said, walking back over to a chest he'd already looked through. "Even if it doesn't seem like it's doing anything, it might be doing something. And in Hiccup's hand, what if he... Who are you talking to?" Jack felt a soul leave his body. He shot to his feet and whirled around to see Hiccup standing in the stairway, with Toothless's head poking down from the bedroom. "You came through the window?" Jack asked, trying hopelessly to act innocent. He'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. There was no way he could get out of this one. Hiccup didn't look amused. He walked down the rest of the stairs, Toothless close on his heel. It would have felt threatening if Toothless didn't just look mildly curious, but Jack was suddenly very happy that he was on the good side. He only hoped it would stay that way, even after this conversation. "What are you doing?" Hiccup asked. Jack didn't know what to answer. He glanced at the door, wondering if it was still snowing and what Jamie was doing right now. Then he looked back at Hiccup. He couldn't come up with a lie, but maybe that was just as good. He didn't want to lie anymore. They were about to leave anyway, one way or another. No more lies. No more almost truth. No more Berk. No more Hiccup. "I'm looking for something," Jack said. He reached into his boot and produced 2 crystals, holding them out for Hiccup to see. "Unless you lost it. I know you have one of them. I need it back." Hiccup's eyes widened. Confusion and guilt passed over his face. How did you..." he stammered before shaking his head. He reached into his satchel tied to his thigh and brought out the 3rd crystal, but didn't hold it out to Jack. He locked it inside his fist. "What are they?" he asked, setting his jaw decisively. Jack shrugged. "Crystals." "Are they valuable?" "To me, they are." Hiccup pressed his lips together before opening them again. "How did you know he had it?" I got a glance of it back at Jotun Island. I've been looking for it since, but I didn't want to..." He gestured at the chest he'd just been looking through. "You could have just asked," Hiccup said, and Jack swallowed nervously at his accusing tone.
Instead of rummaging through our private belongings without permission, I'll let you stay here because I trust you, Jack. Why do you...
He trailed off and just shook his head exasperatedly.
What's different now? What was that reaction back at the Great Hall about?
It was true that Hiccup wasn't okay with the half-truths. Jack had known that all along, but seeing the definite proof of it like this still made his chest constrict painfully. He looked down at the floor, trying to force himself to come up with some kind of explanation, some kind of lie, but his heart wasn't in it. He sighed shakily, closing his eyes. Jamie and I have to leave. Today. There was a long pause. Jack opened his eyes.
You... what?
Hiccup said. There was a soft laugh in his words, as if he desperately wanted to believe that Jack was joking. Then his face fell.
Why? What's going on?
I can't tell you, Jack said hopelessly.
Why not?
Hiccup snapped. Finally, Jack thought to himself. Hiccup threw his arms out in frustration.
How can it be less dangerous to keep all this to yourself, Jack? Why won't you just let me help you?
Because I can't, Jack repeated, doing his best to keep his voice steady. I can't let you get involved. I don't want to put you in danger. He held out his hand to him. His fingers were shaking. The crystal, Hiccup. Hiccup shook his head, but took a few steps closer.
How are you supposed to leave?
The trading ship.
Does that mean you've planned this?
Jack almost laughed. I've never planned anything in my entire life, he said. Hiccup didn't open his hand.
And then what? You don't know the archipelago. You know next to nothing about dragons. You don't know anything of what's out there. I don't understand, Jack. Can't you at least try to explain?
Jack's throat ached. He started, but his voice wavered. He took a deep breath. I'm being followed. Someone wants me dead. It was the wrong thing to say.
What?
Hiccup almost shrieked.
By who? I can't tell you,
Jack yelled and set into a restless pace.
Hiccup, they are the ones who invaded Berk. They came here because of me, and if I stay here, they'll be back. I've put your lives in danger just by being here, so I have to leave. I might know a way to get home, but I need the crystal for that, Hiccup, so give it to me.
He stopped in front of him, holding out his palm. Hiccup's eyes were wide, and they looked a little shinier than usual. But when he didn't show any sign to accept Jack's demand, it didn't stop Jack from gripping his arm, attempting to wrestle the crystal off him.
Jack, what the...
Hiccup yelped.
Stop it. You stop. Give me the... I can't just let you go on your own.
You can't force me to stay, Hiccup. Jack... Toothless gave a sudden growl that made Jack jump away in alarm. His teeth were out, but at least he was snarling at both Jack and Hiccup, demanding they stop fighting. Hiccup's breath was heavy. He started, an almost desperate look in his eyes.
Isn't there some other way?
Jack swallowed thickly. He shook his head.
You said you'd tell me the truth one day.
Maybe. I thought I had more time. Hiccup's brows furrowed.
Well, maybe you do,
he said, and there was a slight change in his voice. The authoritative one, Jack thought to himself. Hiccup opened his palm to reveal the crystal and held it out. Jack tentatively walked forward, almost expecting some kind of trick. As he took it, Hiccup's free hand covered Jack's. Jack stopped breathing for a moment and sent Hiccup a wary look. Hiccup's lower lip trembled slightly before he spoke.
I promised I'd help you,
he said softly. Jack felt like crying. It would have been easier if they'd just kept wrestling. You have, he said, taken aback by the intensity in Hiccup's eyes. It was in moments like these where Jack really felt the weight of all those years in solitude.
No, I said I'd help you get home, and I will,
he said. He seemed slightly uncertain of his words, probably already mapping out the best way to go about this in his head, but didn't let go of Jack's hand.
We can take Toothless. It's faster that way.
Jack stared at him.
What? No, you can't. You can't just leave Berk, Hiccup,
he protested, giving a surprised laugh. His heart was doing some funny motions in his chest.
You're the chief's son. Keyword being son,
Hiccup insisted.
Stoic runs things around here, and he's used to me disappearing sometimes.
Not for that long.
Yeah. We were gone for months when we lived on Outpost Island.
Jack closed his eyes at the thought of roaming the archipelago in search of magic with the whole dragon-riding gang, and quickly shook his head. Not happening. The twins hate me. Snotlout. Gods no. It's too dangerous.
More dangerous than being alone? Hiccup challenged. We're used to dangerous, Jack. Hiccup, are you listening to me? Jack clamped his hand around Hiccup's urgently. You don't know who I am. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Hiccup, He shook his head, his mind racing to find the right words to make him understand, but nothing seemed completely right when he couldn't tell the truth. He sighed deeply and loosened his grip on Hiccup's hand. I don't want you to come with me. My answer is no. The heartbreak on Hiccup's face forced Jack to look away, and when he pulled his hand back, Hiccup didn't try to stop him. Jack put the 3 crystals back in his boot. Jack started. He wasn't able to meet Hiccup's eyes. I just want you to understand that my time here has been... He struggled to find words that properly described his feelings for the silly little island that was Berk and everything on it. He owed Hiccup that much. Better than anything I ever hoped to experience. Dragons and Vikings and everything. Jack, especially you, Jack said, and managed to glance up at him. Sorry for being so... like this all the time. I know you just wanted to help. Thank you. He paused to steady his breathing, then sent Hiccup one last smile. I'm sorry. When he walked out the door and into the falling snow, Hiccup again made no move to stop him. Babytooth landed on Jack's shoulder as he trudged towards the docks. They'd have to figure out the problem with clothes and food later. Hopefully the traders had enough to spare to a couple of stowaways, and ideally they wouldn't throw them overboard. Right now, just getting on the ship was all that mattered. He left footprints in the snow and told himself that that was the reason he looked back. Just to see how fast the snow was settling on the ground, and not to wonder if the haddock's front door would open. Jack wasn't sure if he would be able to refuse him a second time. Babytooth made a soft noise. Jack didn't answer. He turned back ahead and hurried to the docks. What awaited him there was unexpected to say the least. Brand, Hilda, and Andis had somehow climbed to the mast and were making dragging squawks at the men trying to coax them down. Jack hurried down the ramps, then almost yelped when someone grabbed his hand and pulled him behind a huge storage box. What took you so long? Jamie hissed. It took a moment for Jack to find his voice. Just stuff. How long have they been doing that? Too long. If we're sneaking in, this is our best shot. Jack sent him a look. You've gotten a little too good at mischief lately, he told him. Jamie grinned. Learned from the best. Jack glanced up the ramp and then around the docks, but everyone present seemed focused on the 3 monkeys in the mast. He took Jamie's hand and they sped across the pier, hopping onto the ship. As a cargo ship and not a longship, it was a bit heavier and a part of it was enclosed to shelter the goods. Jack and Jamie squeezed in between the boxes and barrels and ended up behind a wheelbarrow with woolen blankets and furs. That could come in handy. Brand, Anders, and Hilda noticed Jamie's absence from the box Jamie had previously been hiding behind, and one by one climbed down the mast like it was the easiest thing in the world. Jack wondered if they did this often. It made him wonder what Jamie had been up to lately. Brand briefly met Jamie's eyes as the 3 of them were ushered off the ship, and Jamie gave him a thumbs up. Brand smiled, then ran away with Anders and Hilda. Jack laughed incredulously. Good job, he told Jamie, ruffling his hair. They remained in the same spot as the traders finished their preparations, only sinking further back behind the wheelbarrow. Jack used his cloak to cover them both. Comfortable? Jack asked after a few quiet minutes. Not particularly, Jamie whispered back. Me neither. They both started at the sound of the sail unfurling. The ship jolted into movement. The wintry air was filled with the sound of waves, wind, groaning oars, and grunting sailors. Jack dreaded the moment he and Jamie would have to reveal themselves, because that probably meant that they'd have to help with the rowing. Babytooth was flying around somewhere, and for once Jack envied her invisibility. His knees were already starting to ache, and his hip was digging into the floor. Jamie lay right next to him, completely still. No, not completely. He was shivering. Are you cold? Jack whispered. Jamie shook his head. Scared? There was a pause. A little, he admitted. He sniffled. Jack let out a shaky sigh and ran his hand through his hair. We'll be all right, he told him. I know. He wondered if he meant it. The groaning of the oars came to a halt. What's that? One of the traders grunted. The ship shuddered, dipping violently to one side. Jack and Jamie exchanged alarmed looks. Were they being attacked or something?
Jack's mind quickly rewound back to Hawthorne, telling stories to the children in the village about pirates and Vikings and cannons blowing their ships to splinters. But the shutter had been way too small for that, and the tales weren't screaming. So then what? "Something wrong, Hiccup?" Jack closed his eyes and held back a curse. "That stubborn little—"
Sort of,"
Hiccup said, sounding distracted.
"Don't worry about it. Did you see anyone board the ship before you left?"
Baby Tooth popped up in front of Jack's face, chirping shrilly. "I'm aware," Jack replied in a quiet hiss.
"Why is he here?"
Jamie whispered. He sounded a little too happy about it, and worst of all, Jack couldn't blame him without being hypocritical. "Aside from those kids?" one of the men asked. "You going somewhere, Hiccup? Another training drill?"
Yeah, training drill. Are you sure?"
"Sure about what?"
"That nobody boarded the ship."
Jack gritted his teeth and threw off his cloak, getting to his feet. "Are you really that dense, Hiccup?" he barked as he stumbled out into the light. "What are you doing?" The traders looked baffled. "The Overland boys?" one of them spluttered. "How did you—" Then he gasped. "The kids! It was a diversion!" Hiccup's eyes were annoyingly bright, relief washing over his expression as he looked at Jack and Jamie.
"Clever,"
he commented. "It was Jamie's idea," Jack said, giving credit where credit was due. He tried very hard to keep a serious face, but couldn't completely fend off the smile fighting its way onto his face.
"Hiccup, I can't stop you from leaving,"
Hiccup interrupted, walking up to him.
"But you can't stop me from coming with you, either."
Jamie's eyes were wide as they flickered between the two of them.
What's going on?"
Jack bit the inside of his cheek. He didn't know what to say.
"Can you stop doing that?"
he asked him. Hiccup blinked.
"Doing what?"
This. Jack gestured frustratedly at him.
"This whole thing. I'm trying to keep you safe, and you just won't take a hint." "I got the hint," Hiccup argued, though it was more like a direct order than a hint. "Anyway, I'm ignoring it."
"Hiccup, Jack." Hiccup put his hands on Jack's upper arms, staring intently at him.
"I don't care what kind of trouble you're in, and I don't care about whatever it is you feel like you have to hide from me. Because maybe I don't know all of you, but I know a whole lot, and of what I do know—"
He struggled with his words for a moment, but his grip didn't loosen.
"I know that you're a good person, and you're my friend. Both of you."
He smiled down at Jamie before looking back at Jack again.
"If helping you is dangerous, then it's a risk I want to take."
Jack was at a total loss for words. He didn't dare move a muscle, very aware of Hiccup's hands around his arms. Behind Hiccup, the traders were exchanging looks, shifting awkwardly. They probably hadn't expected to witness any heartfelt declarations of friendship on this voyage.
"Hiccup,"
Jamie started in a small voice, as if he was afraid to break the silence. He smiled uncertainly at Jack.
"Hiccup knows the archipelago better than anyone." "That's what I said," Hiccup said.
"You didn't say that," Jack argued. "You just said I didn't."
"Well, same difference."
Hiccup let his hands fall and looked between the two of them.
"That, and surely it's more efficient to find your way home on Dragonback than on a trading ship."
Jamie gripped urgently onto Jack's sleeve. He looked pleadingly up at him. Jack already knew he wouldn't be able to resist Hiccup twice. Jamie's puppy dog eyes on top of it was just redundant, and his face must have given away this fact before he even said anything, because something lit up in Hiccup's eyes, and he grinned a toothy grin. Jack sighed, unable to stop himself from smiling as well. "Okay," he said. "But—" he held up a hand before Hiccup could get too excited. He weighed his words, wary of the audience. "Just try to keep an open mind. Things aren't always as they seem." Hiccup frowned.
"Okay, very mysterious,"
he commented, but nodded.
"I will."
Jack smiled gratefully. "Good." Then he looked around and shifted awkwardly. Hi," he said to the traders. "Sorry for intruding. I guess we will be leaving now."
"Toothless?"
Hiccup called, walking over to the dragon. He ran his hand over his snout and head.
"Ready for a journey, bud?"
Toothless burbled happily in response, sending Jack and Jamie a look Jack swore seemed expectant. Hiccup climbed onto his back and beckoned Jack and Jamie to follow. Jamie went first, all but shaking with excitement. His last flight with Toothless had been short, and they had other things to think about back then. Now he had an entire adventure on Dragonback to look forward to. Hiccup let him sit in front. Jack climbed up behind Hiccup.
"Do we know where to go?"
Jack whispered in English to Baby Tooth as she settled on his shoulder. She shrugged.
"I guess we'll find out on the way. Ready?"
Hiccup asked.
"Absolutely,"
Jamie said delightedly. Hiccup changed the gear and patted Toothless lightly on the head.
"Let's go, bud."
And they took to the skies.